The sound of chainsaws shattered the morning calm. I was halfway through my second cup of black coffee, staring out over Lake Marlowe from the porch of my family's ranch, when the first cut echoed through the hills. At first I thought it was just routine tree trimming until I saw men in hard hats, walking straight onto my land, from my porch. I could see them swarming the old wooden bridge that spanned the narrowest part of the lake. For workers in neon vests were already climbing over its beams with saws in hand, like termites devouring a memory. My memory. I bolted down the hill, boots kicking up dust in rage. "Hey," I hollered. "What do you think you're doing?" The crew looked up. One guy hesitated. Then came her voice, sharp, nasal, authoritative. "Stand back, sir. This is an authorized demolition." There she was, Linda Crowley, HOA president, and self-declared savior of the neighborhood, stood on the gravel path holding a clipboard like it was the Constitution. She was flanked by a security guard and wore that same smug expression I'd seen too many times at community meetings. A hybrid of superiority and fake sympathy. I pushed past the guard. "Linda, you're on private land. That bridge has been here since 1968. My grandfather built it. You don't have the right." Linda barely blinked. According to HOA zoning regulation 7.13, the structure qualifies as an unauthorized crossing over a shared aquatic resource. "You're making that up." She flipped through a stack of papers with dramatic flair. Section 12B of the HOA expansion plan, ratified in January, outlines jurisdiction over the lakeshore. "Your property is now part of the community. Perimeter, you should have received notice." "I never got anything," I said through clenched teeth. "That bridge doesn't affect your damn resort. It's not even on your side of the lake." She gave me a look like I was a misbehaving child. "Unfortunately, the vote was held. You chose not to participate. Now we're cleaning up non-compliant structures. This bridge poses a liability." I glanced at the structure, its beams aged but sturdy, holding decades of family history. "What liability? It's never failed. My cattle use it, my kids grew up fishing off it." She smiled sweetly. "Now they can learn to kayak from the new HOA marina." That's when I saw it. Across the lake, nestled behind a freshly paved trail and manicured hedges, was the resort the HOA had built last year. It was a ridiculous monstrosity: wooden cabanas, a floating dock, paddle boats, and a so-called community center with a rooftop lounge. An eyesore that reeked of gentrified wilderness. They claimed it was a recreational space, but it reeked of profit and control. And now, apparently, they were expanding it right into my lake. "You're overreaching," I said quietly, voice tight, "and you know it." Linda didn't reply. She just gave the foreman a nod. The chainsaws started again. By sundown, the bridge was gun-reduced to a heap of snapped timber and floating debris. The workers packed up, and Linda left without another word. I stood on the shoreline long after. The sun dipped below the hills, the water lapping gently where a legacy used to stand. All that remained was a scar in the water and an ache in my chest. That bridge had connected more than land, it connected memories. My father once led a trail ride across it after the spring floods. I proposed to my wife on it. We scattered my grandfather's ashes from its railing, and now it was gone. Erased like it meant nothing. But as I looked across the lake at the glowing lights of their precious resort, something inside me shifted. They didn't just tear down a bridge, they declared war. They thought it was over when they crushed the bridge. But I knew the truth. When someone comes after your family's legacy, you don't just sit back and watch them paint over history. You fight, even if the battlefield has turned into HOA boardrooms and zoning loopholes. The next morning, I drove to the county land office, fuming. I asked for a current zoning map, property line verification, and every document tied to the recent HOA perimeter extension. The clerk, a tired man with coffee stains on his shirt, raised an eyebrow when he heard the address. "Oh, you're part of that HOA land grab mess," he muttered. "You're not the first one in here." That told me plenty. After a wait, he handed over a thick file. Inside, maps, memos, and a printed agenda from an HOA meeting I was never invited to. Somehow, through obscure wording and a low turnout vote, the HOA had petitioned to redraw jurisdiction lines, quietly extending them onto parcels they didn't own. Under the guise of shared environmental maintenance, they'd used a loophole in the zoning board's review process, one that assumed no objection meant consent. Since I hadn't received the notice, or so they claimed, they treated my silence as agreement. I left the office clutching the folder like a weapon. Next stop was my attorney, Jake Mendoza, a hard-nosed ranch lawyer who'd gone up against oil companies and won. He flipped through the documents, scowled, then looked up at me. "You've got a fight ahead," he said. "They didn't exactly break the law, but they sure bent it till it screamed. So what do we do?" Jake leaned back. "You could sue, challenge their authority, but they've already filed permits for expansion. Time isn't on your side. They'll bury you in delays while they build." He was right. That's exactly how HOA bullies worked. Paperwork warfare. Red tape instead of fists. They knew most landowners didn't have the time or resources to wage long legal battles, especially against a stacked board with community funds behind them. I left his office more frustrated than I'd arrived. Week passed. I watched from my side of the lake as construction crews extended the HOA marina. What used to be natural shoreline, shaded by oaks and teeming with dragonflies, was now being dug out and paved. The water level was lowered slightly to allow for concrete supports. That's when it hit me. They didn't even understand the lake. Lake Marlow isn't fed by rainfall alone. It's balanced by the Dam A structure my grandfather designed decades ago to manage both irrigation and runoff. The HOA's shared aquatic resource was entirely dependent on the flow I allowed through the dam. They never asked permission, never even acknowledged it. They thought the lake was theirs because they voted it into their blueprints. That night, I walked the dam path, flashlight in hand. The old metal overflow valve sat untouched, just as I remembered. Rusty, but solid, still functioning. That's when the plan began to take shape. A slow, dangerous seed of resistance. But I wasn't ready to act. Not yet. I made one last effort. At the next community board meeting, I showed up early, sat right in front. Linda was at the head of the table in a pearl blazer, looking more like a corporate CEO than a community leader. When the floor opened for comments, I stood up. "I'm requesting the HOA CC all further expansion into Lake Marlow until proper ownership and water management rights are reviewed," I said clearly. "This land is part of my deed, and that lake, it's fed by a dam on my private property. You build more, you risk flooding, or worse." Linda laughed. Actually laughed in front of everyone. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, voice dripping with fake charm. "We appreciate your input, but this community has already voted. Perhaps it's time to accept that the town is growing. You can't stand in the way of progress forever." I stared at her, pulse steady. "I don't intend to stand in its way," I replied. "But I can choose what flows downstream." Her smirk faded just a bit. They dismissed my request. The vote was unanimous. They left that night believing I'd finally surrendered. What they didn't realize was that I'd just issued my warning, and they ignored it. They didn't take me seriously. They never do. Not until it's too late. Linda and her board of suburban conquistadors thought their paper authority overrode everything: maps, deeds, nature itself. But they made one critical mistake. They forgot who controlled the water. The HOA's gleaming $5.5 million resort sat like a crown jewel at the edge of Lake Marlow, expanding by the day. Concrete supports, floating cabanas, solar lights, even a wine bar dock were under construction. But what none of them knew, or cared to ask, was this: that water wasn't theirs. It never was. I own the dam that feeds Lake Marlow. It sits on the back edge of my ranch, hidden behind a thicket of sycamores. My grandfather and great-uncle built it after the flood of '61, turning an unpredictable stream into a life-giving reservoir. They added an overflow valve manual, heavy, and buried beneath layers of steel and earth. It wasn't some toy. It was a force of nature, waiting to be awakened. For decades, we kept it half open, just enough to keep the lake stable and the downstream creek flowing. Never had a reason to touch it until now. The plan took shape over 3 quiet nights. I triple-checked the weather forecast. A storm was moving in heavy rain, high runoff, perfect cover. I inspected the dam. No cracks, no weak points. I mapped the resort's position and calculated the breach path. It would take 20 minutes max for the surge to cross the lake and reach their shoreline. Next, I cleared out the cattle and equipment from the lower basin, told my ranch hands we were closing for weather precautions, sent them home early with bonuses and warm pie from my wife. Nobody needed to be there but me. Then, I waited. The storm rolled in like a war drum. Wind howled through the canyon, rain lashed against the windows, thunder growled in the distance, echoing off the hills like something ancient. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the lake swell, its surface disturbed by sheets of rain and growing wind. Across the lake, the resort's lights still twinkled arrogantly in the darkness, solar torches flickering along the docks, music humming from a pavilion speaker system. They were hosting some kind of party under their rainproof canopy. Champagne and candlelight, probably. Toasting to progress, they didn't realize they were celebrating on borrowed time. I took my keys, jacket, and a lantern, and made my way to the dam. The rain stung like needles, but I moved with purpose, each step carving deeper into soaked gravel and soaked memory. I thought of the bridge, my father's hand on my shoulder as we crossed it during calving season, my kids learning to cast a fishing line, my grandfather carving his initials into one of its support beams before he passed. Took that from me. I reached the dam gate, opened the rusted latch, and stepped into the concrete shell. Water rushed below, impatient and rising. The wheel stood before me, tall, rust-kissed, firm. I gripped it with both hands and turned. The groan that followed was otherworldly, ancient metal protesting the birth of something new. The sluice gate creaked, then, with a deep, rumbling roar, it opened wide. The surge was immediate. Water exploded through the spillway like a freight train unleashed. Mud churned, trees trembled. The overflow channel that had sat dry for months came alive, with violent purpose, and the lake responded. Its surface dropped. Waves sloshed across the embankment. The current pulled toward the resort with a hunger that only nature understands. From the hilltop, I could already see it happening. The water swelled past the marina's foundation. Deck chairs floated like leaves, paddleboats tipped sideways. Then, like a patient predator, the flood took the main boardwalk. Snap, dot, crash, dot, gone. The storm swallowed their celebration whole, and me. I turned, walked back to the ranch, and watched from my porch, soaked, silent, and steady. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace. They'd taken my bridge, but I'd just reminded them, I still own the river. By sunrise, the resort was unrecognizable. The water had receded just enough to reveal the wreckage. Shattered docks, upturned kayaks, and luxury patio furniture tangled in cattails like driftwood. Mud streaked across the boardwalks and patios. The wine bar had collapsed into itself, reduced to broken glass and soggy mahogany. Nature didn't just visit, it reclaimed. I sipped my coffee from the porch, boots propped on the rail. The clouds had lifted, leaving behind a quiet so pure it hummed. It reminded me of mornings before the HOA came, before rules, before concrete, before entitlement. By noon, the sirens started. 3 sheriff cruisers, an environmental response truck, and a convoy of HOA board members in panicked convoys lined the opposite shore. They stared at the damage with slack jaws, still in disbelief. Men in polo shirts pointed at the dam with binoculars, whispering like amateurs trying to read a battlefield. Linda Crowley arrived last. She stepped out of a black SUV wearing designer rain boots and fury. Her perfect suburban armor was spattered with mud before she made it 10 feet. A construction foreman tried to brief her. She shoved past him and marched straight toward the lake's edge, glaring across the water right at me. I lifted my mug. In salute. She didn't wave back. An hour later, my gate buzzer rang. It was the sheriff himself, Tom Hargreaves. I'd known him since high school. He took off his hat as I opened the gate and stepped onto the porch. You and I both know why I'm here, he said. The HOA wants answers. You know the dam's on my land, I said, calm. And you know we had a storm last night. Tom nodded slowly. And you also know that letting the floodgate fully open during a storm could be seen as reckless endangerment, or flood mitigation, I replied. I was protecting my cattle pastures. No regulation says I can't manage water flow on private property, especially during heavy rainfall. He studied me for a long moment. Then he said, "They're calling it sabotage. Let them call it what they want," I said. "But if they want to pursue this in court, they better bring every permit they faked and every vote they rigged. Because if I go down, I'm dragging their entire HOA charter into the light." Tom smirked just a little. "I figured you'd say that." He handed me a copy of the incident report and left it at that. No handcuffs, no charges, just paperwork. For now, by the end of the week, it was all over the local news. Luxury lakeside resort devastated by reporters tried spinning it as an act of God. Some community members even blamed the HOA's overdevelopment for destabilizing the shoreline. But it was Linda who took the biggest hit at the next emergency board meeting held awkwardly in a water dam pavilion. A motion of no confidence was introduced. Members who once backed her blindly now pointed fingers. She fumbled through excuses, claimed ignorance of the dam, even tried painting herself as the victim of a rural extremist. Didn't matter. By vote of 7-1, Linda Crowley was removed as president of the HOA. Her resignation letter was bitter, full of accusations and veiled threats, but it didn't matter. Her reign was over. As for the resort, it's still there, barely half-flooded, untouched since the storm. The HOA ran out of budget to rebuild. And with Linda gone, the new leadership decided not to pursue further development near the dam. No one even mentions the bridge anymore. But I built something new in its place. A wide, flat stone path. No rails, just clean stone and memory. It's not the same, but it's mine. A few days ago, my daughter asked me why I didn't just build a new bridge from the start, instead of fighting everyone. I told her the truth. Sometimes when people take without asking, you don't just rebuild, you remind them why they shouldn't have messed with you in the first place. She nodded, quiet, watching dragonflies return to the water's edge. Peace had returned to the lake, but if the HOA ever forgets who controls the flow, they'd better pray the dam doesn't remember, too.